بالظبط عنده صغيرة مش رح يقدر يرفع، عنده طالع على الشاشة كثير صغير.
مستقبل الدور الخليجي في إعادة تشكيل توازنات القوة في الشرق الأوسط. تصاعد كبير للدور الإيراني والتركي بالمنطقة، تارة بالتدخل العسكري وتارة بالعمل السياسي والدبلوماسي. بينما يرزح الخليج في دوامة صنعها بنفسه أسهمت في تراجع دوره الإقليمي، وأسست لكونه موضوعاً للتدخل الخارجي بسبب عدد من الأزمات السياسية خلقها في اليمن وختمها بحصار رباعي ضد قطر. فهل سنشهد مراجعات لهذه السياسات التي خلقت هذا التراجع، أم أننا سنشهد مزيداً من التأزيم؟
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مرحبا بكم إلى هذه الجلسة.
Good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the seventh and last session of this forum. We have tackled a number of issues in the last six sessions, and we've talked about the Gulf crisis and the contexts thereby. We've talked about the Gulf relationship and the decline in the weight of the Gulf system. We've talked about the arms race, as well as the role of the United States in the Middle East, the Palestinian cause, Iran, as well as we have tackled different themes. We want to build upon them in this last session and add some insights from our panelists. Every gentleman will have 10 minutes as an allotted time. If we want to remind you of what took place earlier, it seems that the Gulf crisis has affected the Gulf negatively, as well as the role thereby they are preoccupied with each other rather than being preoccupied with the external threats. The balances of power in the world has been refined, but this bloc in the Gulf has been on the retreat, and as we said, they are preoccupied with each other. So are we going to see serious reviews of the Gulf policies, especially the Saudi Emirati policies that are threatening the Gulf system? Would it be possible for the GCC to be revived again in line of the new balances of power? This session we'll be hearing from Stephen Wright, who is a professor of international relations and associate dean for academic affairs and research in the College Humanities and Social Sciences at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. He was previously an associate dean and the head of the Department of International Affairs at the Qatar University. He received his doctorate in international relations from the University of Durham. We have also Dr. Mamdouh Salama, an expert on oil. He is a visiting professor on economics, petroleum and energy at the ESCP Europe in London. He received his doctorate in economics from Pacific Western University. He has been commissioned by the Indian and the Jordanian governments, as well as Opec, to prepare oil and energy studies, and has written 4 books on oil economics, including causes of the sharp decline in crude oil prices. Hani Al-Bassous is an assistant professor at the College of Economics and Political Sciences at Sultan Qaboos University in Oman. He received his doctorate from Bradford, and he was a visiting professor at George Washington University. He had published a number of research papers on the Arab Revolution, political change in the Middle East, the Gulf security, the Syrian conflict, and extremist Jewish thought. We have also Walid Al-Zubaydi. He is an Iraqi researcher and contributor to several Arab websites and newspapers. He has taken part in many conferences and seminars on Iraqi and Arab affairs. His works include Baghdad Wall, Diary of a Witness to the Invasion of Iraq, The Volcano, the story of the eruption of the Iraqi resistance, and the Iraqi resistance in America. As a matter of fact, we'll be abiding by the time. We'll start with Steve Wright. You've got 10 minutes, sir, and then we'll have a certain time for asking questions.
سبق لدينا وقت إضافي كذلك فستيفن تفضل.
Well, firstly, let me just thank the Al Jazeera Center for inviting me to this conference, this forum today. I'm delighted and very honored to be here, and also to be part of a very distinguished panel as well, so I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much. So in terms of the key theme of this panel and the key questions that we've been asked to address, which firstly is are we likely to see a serious recalibration of Saudi and Emirati foreign policies? My immediate conclusion would be no, we're not. I think for the foreseeable, at least for the foreseeable future, we should expect that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates will continue with their current outlook on the region itself and also press forward with that. What I would like to try and do in my talk, however, is to give a bit of background to why this evolution has come about and this divergence exists between the Saudi and the UAE on one side and other countries on the other, in particular Qatar. And then go on to look at some more key themes that are some evolving trends that I see taking place within the region, in particular looking at it from an economic perspective and how that itself will change the broader balance of power within the region. So I think firstly, when we look at the nature of Emirati and Saudi foreign policies, about why they came into being and how they differ with Qatar, you can see very clearly that what the UAE, and in particular I would say the UAE rather than even more than Saudi Arabia, because it has such a presence within the region and it has a very expansive foreign policy in a number of countries across the Middle East. You can see that it's one which is promoting or seeking to achieve security and the balance of power through what I would see as traditional authoritarianism, and also seeking to close civil society space, close and reduce the freedom of speech that exists as well. And this is very much at odds with what you can see Qatar promoting, which is the achievement of human dignity through human development and a gradualist opening of civil society. And I think here, what we can see is something very clear, that these two visions for the region, in terms of how they're approaching it, are diametrically opposed to each other. And actually, to the extent whereby you would see each of the approaches as it would be viewing the other state as posing an existential threat to the other's survival. Why did these changes, this shift, and this rift within the GCC come about, and these changes in outlook across the region? Well, it came about for a few reasons. Of course, it's a response to the wider Arab Spring, and it's what we see now is a continuation of that in many respects. But it's also about the pivot of the United States, about how the United States did not support its traditional allies within the region during the region-wide uprising. It's also about how the United States signed the JCPOA agreement with Iran without having regional states involved in the negotiation process. This led to a divergence, and it led to a crystallization of a different view on regional order, which are at odds with each other, which are incompatible, which are likely to stay there for the foreseeable future. But more broadly, and I think whilst this division exists and there is very little, it doesn't seem likely that it will be overcome anytime soon, what we are seeing is that the challenges faced across the region require states to come together, because it is beyond the capacity of one state or a small grouping of states to actually overcome them. And in particular, these are economically driven. These are driven by the rise, the needs for the youth, unemployment, to provide enough economic development. And what we can see is that at least when we look at the wider geopolitics of energy, I think this is instructive in terms of telling us where the region is going. Now, the region itself, as we know, the Gulf region is heavily dependent on oil revenues. But what we can see is that we are now entering what I would consider to be a low oil price era, because oil markets tend to go in cycles of high oil price and low oil price. Now, from 1973 till the mid-1980s, it was a high oil price era. From the mid-1980s to the year 2000, it was a low oil price era. 2000 to 2014, a high oil price era. Now, we've entered into a low oil price era, and I would note that these generally last around about 15 years. But I think when we think ahead, given the shale revolution that's taken place in the United States and how there's much more access to energy, we can expect a lower oil price era for at least the next 15 years, even beyond that. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? It means that the challenges that the states within the region will face on economic terms are going to be much more aggravated. It means that states will have to try to find means of raising capital. That capital, will come, of course, from, raising sovereign bonds for liquidity, through austerity measures within the government sector, and also from raising taxation in different ways. But the energy market, it clearly indicates about where the challenges, the economic challenges, that key states within the region will face. So what impact does this have on the broader balance of power within the region? Well, I think for me, the answer really is that, number one, we are seeing a declining influence of the United States within the region itself. And this is primarily driven because of the United States being energy independent. That now, given the production capacity that the US has achieved, that strategic aspect now is less for the United States. But also we've seen, since the Obama administration era, a reduction in terms of a strategic focus on the region, and this was demonstrated through the Arab Spring, and it's accelerated even further under President Trump. So given the economic challenges that the region faces in the future, this, I think, will open the door very much towards China. And why do I say that? Because of the nature of the Belt and Road Initiative, the Silk Road, we have to recognize that the scale of investment that China now is inputting across the region, and that's ranging from being in Iran to Egypt, all of the Gulf states are also members of the Belt and Road Initiative. And given the economic challenges that are increasingly being faced, China, I think, will become increasingly important as a lender of capital to the region, as the challenges as the economic challenges which are driven by energy demand become more acute. Now, why is these revenue streams so critical for the Gulf states, and in particular for, I would say, it's because of the ability to, firstly, I would say, is maintain the peg to the dollar. Because if you think 5, 10 years ahead, as the capital gets drawn down, and in particular, looking at Oman, looking at Saudi Arabia, even in the UAE, you can see those challenges becoming more and more acute. But I think as Saudi Arabia, also you start seeing these economic contradictions accelerating within the country, you're going to see an increased engagement of China there, but across the region more broadly. By doing that, I think you'll start seeing then China becomes a much more significant economic actor within the region, not necessarily replacing the United States from a military point of view, but it becomes a key international player within the region, which then you can start seeing how the balance of power within the region and different dynamics taking place. In many respects, it is, I think, the future trend of the balance of power within the region is one of Asianization. Asianization, I think, is really where you can see that the economic interests of the region become more and more integrated with the East, the Far East. And then on the basis of that, you start seeing greater engagement. So to sum up, I think the observations I would make is that, unfortunately, within the region now, we see very clear differences in visions for the region and contradictions existing between regional states, to an extent that the GCC as an organization has largely, in my opinion, ceased to become a viable organization in its entirety. We will have to be thinking now longer term. And these emergences for the possibility for an emergence of a new type of regional order, engaging with other new international powers which will become increasingly engaged in the region, this will take a great deal of time. But we can already see how this shift is taking place, has taken place because of regional insecurity, is going to accelerate because of economic factors, and a changed landscape will be taking place as all of these come together. And on that, I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. شكرا جزيلا ستيفن. البعد الاقتصادي الذي لم يحضر كثيرا في نقاشات امس واليوم مهم جدا ان يكون حاضر في هذه الجلسه.
Yes, this is a very good addition. As a matter of fact, the gentleman talked about the disparity in the visions between the state and the Gulf. We'll be, as a matter of fact, listening from Dr. Mamdouh Salama. He'll be talking about economics as well. I would like, first and foremost, to thank the center, the Al Jazeera Center, the Al Jazeera Studies Center, for allowing me to speak to you. I have resorted to choose the Petro Yuan and the influence thereby on the economy of the world and the economy of the Gulf. On the 26th of March last year, China introduced what we call Petro Yuan. That means the Chinese currency that is used to price and sell oil in Shanghai. This step has plenty of ramifications and implications on the global economy, as well as the Chinese economy, the US economy, and the Gulf economy. This step, as a matter of fact, would lead to political implications as well. But before talking about this issue, I would like to say that in 2.5 hours from the session that the Petro Yuan was introduced, the oil market sold to the tune of 15 million barrels of oil within 2.5 hours. And within 1 week, the Petro Yuan was supreme over the Brent in terms of the size of the oil sold in Petro Yuan. So these are additional information, but in order to understand the impact of the Petro Yuan on the American Petro Dollar, which it will supplant, we need to talk perhaps for a minute or 2 minutes on the Petro Dollar. Everybody knows that the Petro Dollar is the American dollar that has been used since 1973 in the procurement as well as pricing of oil, and Saudi Arabia has played a pivotal role in the application and the usage of the petrodollar after the lift of the gold cover, which was used since the Second World War in accordance with Bretton Woods Convention, whereby the dollar was the currency used in order to stabilize the market. But America was indebted hugely to the extent that it had no gold to transfer the currency or the gold into currency, and thus it shook off the system entirely. And Nixon, his administration, thought of a way in order to press ahead with the demand on the dollar. So they convinced Saudi Arabia with the idea of pegging the dollar to the oil in 1973. In 1975, the Opec countries followed suit. They followed the provides three benefits to the US. The first one is to do with the higher demand on the dollar. Second, the continuation of supporting the Treasury's bond, i.e. the leverage and the loans and so on and so forth. And thirdly, it will allow the USA to buy oil in printed money or with printed money. China is the biggest economy in accordance with IMF nowadays, and in accordance as well with the World Bank that uses certain benchmarks in terms of the purchasing power of the currencies. The size of China in 2019 is to the tune of $27 trillion in comparison with the American economy that is to the tune of $21.5 trillion. That means the Chinese economy is higher to the tune of 28% in comparison with the USA's economy. China, as a matter of fact, wants from its currency to reflect this economic power. And as a matter of fact, China is the biggest exporter, or rather importer, of oil, and the USA is the biggest consumer. China is not the biggest consumer, however, it imports 11 million barrels a day. So as a matter of fact, China wants for the oil market and the global economy to be a manifestation of its muscle flexing. As a matter of fact, this Petro Yuan is very important, and China wants to depend on its own currency. So that's why China has followed this path. When it comes to the introduction of the Petro Yuan, this will affect the Gulf countries, and it will affect also the sanctions, the American sanctions leveled against Iran or Venezuela or Russia, as well as it will affect the trade of oil by and large in the globe. As far as the Gulf countries are concerned, I usually used to advise and say that you need to dispense with the dollar pegging because of the fact that these countries have plenty of oil reserve to support their own currency. But if they wanted to have a basket of currencies, they can do so. They can use euro, the yuan, the British pound, the sterling pound, the yuan, and the dollar. In addition to that, the USA is manipulating the prices of oil because when they raise the value of the dollar, the prices would increase. But this would lead to the decrease of the demand on oil. And when the opposite takes place, when they decrease the value of the dollar, according with the decrease of interest rates, the Gulf states would be compelled to expend a number of, they will be expending more in order to buy more dollars, and thus the prices will be increasing as well. There's another issue here. The USA uses the Petro Dollar in the set of sanctions leveled against Iran. America prevents certain states and certain banks from the revenues of selling the Iranian oil. The Petro Yuan has been floated, as we said, and thus Iran, which is subject to the sanctions, American sanctions, they can manipulate, they can maneuver, and they can depend on the Petro Yuan because China can buy the 2 million barrels that Iran produces every day, and it can pay Petro Yuan rather than paying Petro Dollar. On another note, the American Congress is seeking passing legislation to pursue OPEC, or prosecute rather OPEC, because of certain monopolizing practices and manipulation in the price of oil. In fact, America does so and not OPEC. And if we define the idea of monopolizing, or we see that OPEC has nothing to do with monopolizing the oil industry, because it was a reaction on 7 companies, or 7 sisterly companies, as they used to be called. They had the hegemony over the oil industry. So OPEC cannot be monopolizing the oil industry. Second, OPEC produces 43% of the oil. What about the 57%? 57% of the oil is produced by other countries. 75% of the reserves are there within the OPEC states, and 25% belongs to other countries. So we cannot say that OPEC is the sole monopolizer of the oil industry. And even if the USA prosecutes OPEC or blackmails OPEC, I think OPEC, if it's unified, can reciprocate with the USA. First, they can withdraw all the investments and all the money from America, and also they can increase the prices of the barrel of oil, and a gap will follow in the market of America. OPEC can swap horses. They can move from Petro Dollar to Petro Yuan as well. Lastly, I would like to talk about the withdrawal of Qatar from OPEC. OPEC, as a matter of fact, is a very acts as a smart businessman. They thought that 700,000 barrels plummeted in one day, and thus the secret of luxury in Qatar is to do with the LNG, and it's nothing to do with the oil. So Qatar, as any smart businessman, focuses on the LNG because it has plenty of investments. It has the best GDP per capita across the world. Perhaps it felt that this meager kind of oil and the confrontation of Saudi Arabia and others, the role of oil will be limited indeed. And that's why it turned into the LNG. And there's another reason here. Qatar is thinking long term. Perhaps it felt that during the term of Trump, the Congress will be passing this law prosecuting OPEC. And thus, with hindsight, it was preactive, and it withdrew now so that its investments won't be affected in the USA. Lastly, I would like to say that the Petro Yuan during the upcoming 15 years will be the main reserve currency in the world, and the Petro Yuan will be the currency of oil, and it will supplant the Petro Dollar. Thank you very much indeed.
دكتور ممدوح، شكرا جزيلا. إذن هذه المنطقة التي تعيش عصر التحول من البترو دولار إلى البترو يوان، أو من الأمريكا إلى الأسينة إن صح التعبير كما سماها ستيفن، ايجينايزيشن. كيف تنظر إلى الأمور دكتور هاني البسوس؟
حياك الله. السلام عليكم. أولا نتقدم بالتحية لمركز الجزيرة للدراسات على هذه الدعوة الطيبة وعلى هذا الجهد الطيب في هذا المنتدى. يعني بناء على ما تقدم به الزملاء أبني عليه أن توازنات القوى الإقليمية عندما نتحدث عن هذه المنطقة الغنية، منطقة الشرق الأوسط، منطقة غنية، منطقة استراتيجية ومحط أنظار من سنوات طويلة لدول عظمى في العالم، خاصة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. بالتالي ما يحدث من توازنات وإعادة التوازن في هذه المنطقة لا ينفك ولا ينفصل بتاتا عن تدخل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية في هذه المحاور. وبالتالي واضح لدينا اليوم أن المنطقة تنقسم إلى 3 محاور أساسية. أولا تركيا، وإن كانت بعيدة نسبيا عن السنتر أو عن المركز إلا أنها لها نفوذ، دولة صاعدة. أوكي. فبالتالي يعني المحور الأول هي تركيا كدولة صاعدة قوية اقتصاديا وسياسيا وعسكريا، ولها نفوذ واضح في هذه المنطقة، ولها علاقات طيبة مع بعض الدول في المنطقة العربية. المحور الثاني هي إيران، وما قامت به خلال السنوات القليلة الماضية والسنوات الطويلة أيضا من عملية توسع ونفوذ وتأثير قوي في عواصم عربية مختلفة. لكن يعني كلتاهما يعملان في نطاق بعيد عن نفوذ الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، بمعنى أنه تركيا وإيران لا تعملان تحت غطاء خارجي. محاولة العمل المستقل والنفوذ والتأثير في هذه المنطقة وبناء هذه القوى الإقليمية لم تعد تلتزم ولم تلتزم بأي إملاءات من خارج نطاق هذه المنطقة. المحور الثالث وهو الأهم في صلب هذا الموضوع وهو محط أنظارنا حاليا هي السعودية، بالإضافة إلى الإمارات العربية المتحدة بدرجة ثانية أو أقل، ومصر، بمعنى أنه المحور الثالث الجديد الذي بدأ يصعد خلال السنوات الماضية هي السعودية، وبدرجة أقل نسبيا الإمارات العربية المتحدة بالإضافة إلى مصر. وإذا تجاوزا قلنا إنه إسرائيل دولة، وهي ليست هي دولة احتلال، هي الآن تحاول أن تنتمي إلى هذا المحور الجديد، وهو مدعوم من قبل الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. ما يحدث أن كل دولة من هذه الدول لها مصالحها ونفوذها وتحاول أن تلقي بظلالها على الإقليم بشكل كامل. طبعا موضوع التنافس أدى إلى صراع دموي في بعض المناطق، وأدى إلى نفوذ سياسي واقتصادي في بعض الدول. لكن كل هذه المحاور قامت على 3 أسس: أولا العلاقات والمصالح، ثانيا الهواجس الأمنية، وثالثا الفكر السياسي. لأنه واضح لدينا أن ما بين المحور الأول والثاني والثالث اختلافات سياسية وقد تكون مذهبية، وبالتالي هذا اليوم أصبح واقع مجسد. منطقة الشرق الأوسط تنقسم إلى 3 محاور، وهناك نفوذ أمريكي واضح يدعم طرف على حساب الباقي. الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية مصالحها تلتقي بالتأكيد، هي ليست صدفة دعم الولايات المتحدة للسعودية وسكوتها عن السعودية والإمارات فيما تقوم به من أعمال سواء في اليمن أو حصار قطر أو بعض النفوذ في بعض الدول العربية وحتى بعض الدول الأفريقية. هذا الصمت الأمريكي ليس له تفسير إلا أن هناك فعلا دفع بهذا الاتجاه.
Especially what happened a few days ago when there was actual threat of imposing sanctions on any country which exports oil from Iran, and the Saudis and the Emiratis would fill the gap in the market as a result of the absence of the Iranian oil. So therefore, the Americans are trying to recalibrate the balance of power in the region in a way that serves the American interests and protects Israel, and what promises were given by the Trump administration, and in a way to normalize Israel's existence in the region, to make it an accepted part of the region. The American interests, of course, are related to 2 important factors. First is the oil, although some are underestimating the importance of the oil, but the oil remains an important factor here, in addition to natural gas, of course. In addition, this area is of strategic importance, so therefore America's interests must be protected here. Egypt, as a Sisi regime, is trying to consolidate his power, and he tries to prolong his existence in power for as long as possible. For this reason, he entered the three countries imposing the blockade on Qatar, and we saw how close the relations between Egypt and Israel were. This is in addition, of course, to what our other colleagues have talked about in today's morning sessions, so far as the deal of the century is concerned, and how there is a joint pressure on the Palestinian National Authority jointly by the Americans, the Saudis, and the Emiratis, and they all are trying to establish a new axis which will serve the Israeli interests in the region. Of course, there were other events, and these were aimed at weakening the Turkish axis. The failed coup d'etat in 2016, and which was followed in the last 2 years by the attempts to weaken Turkey's economy, and this covert war waged by the United States against Turkey. So far as Iran is concerned, there's first of all the withdrawal from the nuclear deal, secondly the sanctions, which in my opinion in the future these sanctions will have a huge impact on the region if they are intensified, because
السياسي أو الاقتصادي تكون البدائل كافية
would lead to more.
لديهم من الفائض والإمكانيات.
It's true that the Saudis and the Emiratis have the extra potential to make up the loss created by the absence of the Iranian oil, but this will have its own implications, no doubt. So far as the Gulf countries are concerned in all of these aspects, it would have been more incumbent upon them, rather than imposing this blockade against Qatar, instead there should have been attempts to restore the unity and the cohesion amongst the GCC countries. We all know that the GCC was established as a result of the threats faced by the region, like the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979, then the Iran-Iraq War. And some may say that these are internal threats, and that is true. But the threats we are currently I'm talking about, but even so, they're still very important, and they should push people in the Gulf to restore unity. There are outside influences, and there is political ambitions by the Emiratis, which is no less than the Saudi ambitions. In fact, it's likely or it's aimed at imposing hegemony and control over the entire region. For this reason, in the near future, there'll be no change. The situation will remain as it is, and maybe even the gap would be even bigger, which may turn into a real struggle, because the blockade against Qatar will not be over in a year or two, unless, of course, strong outside intervention comes into play. But the GCC is no longer a unified council, and it has no functions as at the time when it was established in the early 80s. And this crisis is casting its shadow on the region as a whole and the situation in the Gulf in particular. In this context, I would like to recommend that at least in the foreseeable future, and in order to reach a solution, and this crisis cannot be perpetuated. And some people say the Council will never go back to how it was. I tend to disagree. There has been disagreements and rifts in the past which were overcome, and maybe this time round bilateral relations will take precedence, like the Sultanate of Oman and Kuwait played and exerted a huge amount of efforts to solve the crisis, and in particular the Sultanate of Oman, in my opinion, recently has tried to mediate between regional powers, and it has actually managed to succeed. And as a result of that, the nuclear deal with the 5+1 was reached. Also, if we take into consideration the Kuwaiti efforts supported and aided by the Omani effort, this should maintain, even on a bilateral level, the communication, and this may respond to the needs of the people. I disagree with those who say the Gulf people will reach a state of animosity, that they'll be no longer able to reconcile their differences. I don't think so. I think they remain one people, and all of us must invest in the bare minimum of contacts should be maintained, and even if the gap remains, and it will remain so for the foreseeable future, in the long run we must try to work on reconciliation, and we must continue to call for putting an end to this blockade, and I expect and hope that there will be bold attempts in the near future in that direction.
Thank you for this optimistic note. And although the situation of the Gulf countries seems to be very small, it's going towards the future with a lot of disintegration and a lot of misunderstanding. We have the last intervention of Mr. Zubaydi. Please, the floor is yours. Peace be upon you. Thanks for the Al Jazeera Center for these sessions during 2 days. And as the last speaker in the last session, I could say, through what has been said by the researchers, that the picture which expresses the situation of the country is not happy, is not optimistic. There could be some of reasons for optimism, but they are not enough to make us think that we could overcome the situation soon. I will try to talk about a psychological approach based on 3 ideas based on reason and futuristic vision. The owner of Amazon was speaking about the qualifications of the successful CEO, that he bears responsibility which is not less than the president and head of states. And the successful leader should see the future and live in the future. So if we review what is going on, we see that our leaders and our peoples are living in the past, and this is a huge problem. The second idea, and for the reason aspect, Al-Hassan al-Basri, a thinker, says how to make peace with people. He was asked, and he had an answer: if we implement it as leaders and people, I think that we would have done a big leap. He said, give them and don't take from them. They harm you and don't harm them. Help them solving their problems and don't ask for the help. And he said, and you will be safe. This reality in our societies, we look a different way. The third idea, I think it's important too. The Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal said how to reach good health, and afia is good health, social, psychological, etc. And he answered 9/10 of her good health is to ignore or to let go with the mistakes. But unfortunately, when we see that many of our problems go against this logic, these Ibn Hanbal and Hassan al-Basri spoke more than 1,000 years ago about eliminated reasoning. And what Bezos said, he is a businessman, but he has a political vision. So to reach what we have reached, I think that we have to tell about quick stories, and we always don't think in the outcomes. We get into the path without knowing where we are heading to. At the end of the 70s, there were a lot of changes, important changes in the area. I think many of the speakers mentioned them, or at least some points. The main axis is how do the United States reach the full security for Israel. In the 90s, the price of oil changed, as everybody knows, according to the peace agreement between Egypt, and also after the Afghan war started the Iraqi war. And Iran insisted on carrying on with the war. There is a small detail about the GCC, which was established in 1981, and its mission was to support Iraq in the war. This is a good thing emotion-wise, but they were paying loads of money to avoid catastrophes. If the efforts, real efforts, were done instead of paying money to stop the war, it would have been much better. The President Saddam Hussein at that time knew that the result of the war was a catastrophe economically. The Iraqi dinar was stronger than the Kuwaiti dinar, but after the end of the war and the thousands of killed people, and the Iraqi dinar was half Kuwaiti dinar. So he insisted on the war, but in '88 he had that he rather take poison rather than have a ceasefire, agree on a ceasefire. From '89 and until the year 90, Iraq got into an economic crisis, and the Gulf states didn't make the move to support Iraq economically, and they made a huge mistake by invading Kuwait. And if Saddam knew that 10 years or more later, he wouldn't have done it. After that, things evolved in Iraq and in Arab countries, or they supported the American invasion of Iraq, and then they regretted it. And the Arab League also supported the council which was established to rule Iraq, and they were represented in the Arab League. This support itself for Iraq, for this government, that government, Amr Musa described it as the Iraq constitution was a recipe for mess. So many problems, there were many problems in Iraq, and dramas and outcomes and results. I say that what is happening in the Arab world with all these conflicts and differences and wars, it is clear that it is serving, or it is the result of what started by the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel. The Bush 13 times in his speeches was saying that we went to Iraq in order to protect Israel. And now it is said everywhere that the mission of Trump and Kushner is to reach the transaction of the century, and everybody now have to be tolerant and to look to the future and not keep in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our panelists. We have around 15 minutes left. We open the floor now for your questions. Abdel Fattah. Thank you very much, Dr. Ez and the panelists, for this valuable contribution. In fact, I was expecting to hear more talk relating to the title of this session, which speaks of the future of the role of the Gulf in reshaping and recalibrating the balance of power in the Middle East and to redraw the map of the area. Nonetheless, it's good and well that we heard important points about the economy and the economic side of things. What I gathered from this session, although, is outside powers are still looking at the Gulf countries as a milking cow, no more, no less, and the countries at the center of the Arab world, like Egypt, Syria, and Algeria, have lost their importance to the peripherals, and look especially at what the UAE is doing. And I think, if you allow me to say so, this point perhaps should have deserved more attention. My question to Dr. Stephen Wright is the retreat. We speak about the retreat and the resemblance of the America's role, and yet President Trump only yesterday humiliates yet again Saudi Arabia, and he still insists on the same discourse, like Iran can invade Saudi Arabia within hours, more or less the same language of blackmail that's been going on for some time. And also at the same time, he is pushing the Saudis and the Emiratis to make up the difference or the gap in the oil markets as a result of the absence of the Iranian oil. So this is a question to Dr. Stephen Wright. I have another question to Dr. Stephen Wright. Please you expect that we will go through an era of a fall of the oil prices for the next 15 years sounds a bit strange to me in view of the increase in the tension, and we know in the past this has always meant an increase in the oil prices, unless this is another American dictation to the markets. There are other questions, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I'll start with the title of this session again. We spoke about strategies, and the strategies cannot be countered except by strategies. And it seems to me we are all pawns in a game of nations, but nobody knows who are the main players, our people, our governments, or are we just pawns in the hands of other players? Thank you very much for your interventions. My question to Mr. Mamdouh Salama about the Petro Yuan. In your estimation, China's increased need for petrol can lead to more strength to its own of its own currency, but there are other expectations which say that the market will be more fluid. And will China remain a strong economic power? The Indians say that the Chinese will grow old before they can grow rich, and also the neighboring countries. China is a very dangerous neighborhood, and especially the problems between the two Koreas, and there are other structural factors which may not allow China to remain a leading economic power. And also there is a geopolitical factor. How can America allow the Saudis to reprice their petrol in yuan and peg their currency to the yuan? And there are other considerations which are not exclusively to do with China's demand for petrol. This is a question to Mr. Mamdouh Salama. Thank you very much. Just an observation, if I may, please. So far as the title of the session is concerned, we note that in Syria in 2011, after the revolution, there was intervention by the Gulf countries in favor of the revolution, and there was some cohesion and convergence. We didn't hear much of a complaint by one side against the other, and the same applies to Yemen until the Gulf crisis came into existence, and we started having these rifts, and some factions within Syria started fighting others simply because one faction is pro-Saudi and the other is pro the other side, and so on and so forth. And the same can be said about Yemen. What is happening in this region is no longer linked to the Gulf crisis. The Gulf crisis is one of the manifestations of the current crisis. Maybe this crisis is nothing but a smoke screen to cover for the huge event which is in the making, and it's coming. All major events, whether in the past or now, and including redrawing maps, come after wars. We need a major war in order to have major settlements and redrawing of maps. The area is now going through huge tension, which may lead to a war, whether we're talking about Hezbollah versus Israel or the Gulf or something, because practically speaking, all the tools are ready and available, so much so that the entire region is standing on the brink of a huge strategic shift. Mr. Abdel Fattah spoke about the central countries, the countries at the heart of the Arab world, Iraq, Egypt, Algeria, Syria, have become the peripherals, and the original peripheral, or any peripheral country for that matter, cannot maintain a war. For this reason, I anticipate a total collapse, and we will find ourselves vis-a-vis redrawing of maps and a huge shift in the geopolitical situation. All our thanks and gratitude to Al Jazeera Center. My question is, what ambitions are we talking about when we say Saudi ambitions and UAE? Unfortunately, these are not ambitions. They are designs and desires to exploit. When people strive and aspire to emancipate, liberate themselves, whether we're talking about Algeria or Sudan or others, suddenly the Saudi and Emirati monies from sovereign funds, which may be a curse rather than a blessing. People are more aware than they think. The problem lies with some leaders who are always prepared to further their vested interests and agendas, which will never be in the service of their own people. So, some people try to run an empire on the legs of a helpless chicken, like what Azmi Bshara said. This question is to Dr. Stephen Wright. Dr. Wright, don't you think that the Cold War between the two poles of the world, between Russia and America, has already started even under the guise of what's happening now? Thank you. And I'm being told that we have no more time for more interventions, so we come back to the panelists. We start with Dr. Stephen Wright. Dr. Wright.
Thank you very much. All excellent questions and points. In terms of the first questions that I was asked, how can we view the United States' strategic interest in the region, and are they actually changing? I would say yes, they are changing. And the reason I'll give you is this. As of last year, the United States effectively became energy independent. It is producing enough oil and natural gas in its own capacity that its strategic aspect of how it's traditionally viewed the region has changed. It's also noteworthy that the UAE and Kuwait are now actually importing US gas. So it's a very interesting dynamic about how that strategic relationship has changed. But this builds on what I was saying earlier about how the United States started changing its approach of dealing with the region, which started under Obama, it's accelerated under Trump, and now you can see a different strategic calculation under Trump. Yes, Trump is very much focused on Israel, there's no question about this. That seems to be the pillar now of US foreign policy towards the region from the White House. But of course recognize there is bureaucratic debates that exist in US foreign policy, how it's actually done. But in terms of oil prices, are we, I do think we are entering a low oil price era, and it is going to be lasting for a much lengthier period of time than people realize, for the simple reason because of shale. Now, oil does go in cycles, and we have entered a low oil price cycle since 2014. But the production and the exploitation of shale rock in the United States means that as the prices go up, it becomes more affordable for shale producers to increase their production. That then results in a much greater supply of oil and gas to the market, which depresses the prices. So this really, we can see that change taking place. And this is a seismic geostrategic change that's taking place in how the US is viewing the region. But nevertheless, the interests with regard to Israel are still there. With regard to the other points that we saw, that I've heard, what are the UAE and Saudi ambitions for the region, and also to the extent we can see a Cold War taking place between the United States and Russia. These are excellent points. I think when I look at Saudi and UAE foreign policy, and in particular, I would bring out UAE foreign policy even more so because it is so assertive across the region. It is very much a pattern of trying to dominate, to divide, and effectively suppress the governments within the region whereby they can be controlled. Because it is, what I see is almost, you could see I may even term it like a greater Baniyas policy that is coming out of the UAE. But it is, you can see that's being stretched right from the United Arab Emirates, across through Yemen, the Horn of Africa, and all the way down the Mediterranean. Even if you were to look at the role of the UAE port strategy in areas such as Cyprus, it shows you how the stretch is being labeled out. And this is much bigger than what Saudi Arabia is actually doing. So in that respect, I think we can genuinely see a shift, a genuine shift taking place in foreign policies from the UAE. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. دكتور ممدوح في سؤال عن
Dr. Mamdouh, there is a question about, do you think that the Petro yuan will have this value?
سيصبح البترو يوآن عملة بهذه القوة في الاقتصاد العالمي بديلا للبترو دولار قبل أن
Will it replace the Petro Dollar before China gets old? The Petro Dollar is the basis of the US monetary system, and which is also the basis of the international monetary system. So anything which affects that system affects the world economy, and the United States would be ready to get in, even to get into war in order to defend that system. And I give you two examples. In 2002, Saddam Hussein left a meeting of the ministerial council where they were selling oil for oil against food. And he said that he will use euro as a price for dollar. Only 1 year, the United States invaded Iraq. So we should not be naive that that was the main reason for the invasion, but it was an important reason, because if this was implemented, many countries would have followed him and changed and left the petrodollar. Another example, before the unrest in Libya in 2011, President Gaddafi said that we are acting in order to create an African dinar to sell the African oil with the African dinar instead of selling it with petrodollars. And until now, we know what happened in Libya. The question about China is that it is fearing now a lot that it has $1.3 trillion of the American, and they know that the American debt is increasing on a daily basis. Therefore, China wanted to change from Petro Dollar to Petro Yuan. The question is, will they succeed in doing that? They will, for two reasons. First of all, because they are the first importer of oil in the world. Then they are the biggest economy in the world, and Russia is also supporting the Petro Yuan. So China are trying to convince Saudi Arabia of accepting the Petro Yuan, and Saudi Arabia will accept, but in a different way. This means that Saudi will find itself, if they accept the Petro Yuan for its exports, it will be punished by the United States. So what we could reach is that Saudi Arabia says to America, the oil which I will export to you, I will get $Dollars for it, and the other exports will be for Petro Yuan. Knowing that this will serve the Petro Yuan, because more than 80% of the Gulf countries' exports go to China and to the Pacific area. Thank you, Dr. Hani. Last minute, Dr. Walid, is the area going towards a war? No, I don't think that there will be an open war in the area. Maybe it will be a war like the one in Yemen or in Syria between Saudi Arabia and Iran, in addition to the other international factors. The war is there, but I don't think that it will be a war between nations, because it will be catastrophic and unacceptable. Thank you, Dr. Hani. Thanks you all for your contribution. Thank you for the attendees, and thank you for our viewers. So this is the end of the last session here, and I call upon Dr. Mukhtar to pronounce the final speech.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we thank God for granting us the ability to hold this wonderful gathering and have the pleasure of meeting you all and listen to you and all our viewers on Al Jazeera and our platforms. And we hope that all of this will contribute to solving our many problems. I will not try to summarize the sessions. All what I want is we provide you some food for thought, and we try and provide different perspectives for the sake of a better understanding, especially when it comes to the Gulf crisis and the impact it has been having on the other crises. We did not want to provide answers as much as we wanted you to listen to these experts, and as what the Director General has said last night, we wanted to provide the opportunity for you to listen to the solid research and the political opinion and the analysis. We thank you for persevering and tolerating us, and also the differences of opinion and any shortcomings in the way we organize this event. We thank the State of Qatar for hosting us. We did not try and be nice to them. We tried to criticize them as much as we did with others. We did not want to impose any restrictions and constraints. We open the door wide for all our speakers to speak out their minds. We also would like to thank the people of this hotel and our organizing committee and all our colleagues, and we thank Dr. Mustafa Sawak, the Director General, and His Excellency Sheikh Hamad bin Thamen, the Chairman of the Board of Directors, who played a major role in facilitating our work for us and enabled us to take care of our guests. And we thank all our colleagues. We thank our colleagues in the social media and our bureau members in different parts of the world. We thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us and taking the time and trouble and joining us, and our audience throughout the world who have been following the debate in this forum. We thank you very much. If I want to mention all of the people who had a role to play, I will not be able to do them justice. I thank our guests, especially our speakers, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. I do not want to take too much of your time. I think you listened to enough words in the last 2 days. Thank you again and good night.